The rain had not stopped for 3 days, turning Seattle's late autumn into a blur of gray mist and dripping gutters. Inside the small apartment on Pine Street, the smell of damp carpet clung to the air, mixing with the faint aroma of burnt coffee Daniel had forgotten to finish. The heater rattled quietly in the corner, struggling to warm the cramped living room where silence had settled like dust, thick, unmoving, suffocating. Olivia stood by the window, arms wrapped tightly around her body as if bracing against the storm only she could feel. Her reflection in the glass looked pale, eyes rimmed with swollen red shadows from nights she hadn't slept. She wore a navy blouse, the kind she used to choose for job interviews and client meetings, but today it seemed too polished for the woman inside it, too composed for someone who was breaking apart. Daniel lingered near the kitchen counter, his hands resting on the edge, grease stains faintly visible on his knuckles. He had come home early from the shop, because she asked him to. "We need to talk," she'd said. 4 words that had carved an ache in his stomach before he even stepped through the door. "Daniel," she began, her voice quiet but sharp around the edges, "I can't do this anymore." He didn't answer. He was afraid that if he spoke too soon, he might say something desperate. Instead, he watched her, noticing details he had always memorized without trying. The slight quiver of her left hand when she was overwhelmed, the way she pressed her lips together when she was holding back anger or tears, and the faint scar near her temple from a childhood fall she once told him about on a warm night when they had still believed in each other. She inhaled slowly. "I'm tired of pretending everything is fine. I'm tired of the bills we can't pay, of you working yourself into exhaustion for a life that keeps slipping through our fingers." His jaw tightened. "I'm trying," he said softly. "You know I'm trying." "I know," she whispered. "That's what makes this harder." Olivia turned from the window and looked at him fully, her eyes full of a sorrow that cut deeper than anger ever could. "Daniel, I feel like I'm suffocating. Every time I have to tell my coworkers that you're still doing odd jobs at the shop, I see the pity in their eyes. My mother keeps asking why I married someone who refuses to aim higher. And the truth is, I don't have an answer anymore." Her words landed like stones in his chest. He had expected an argument, another night of raised voices and slammed doors, but this quiet unraveling hurt more. "I'm not refusing to aim higher," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I'm working every day towards something real, something that will last." "I know you believe that," she replied, "but belief isn't enough for me anymore." Daniel took a step toward her, then stopped. The space between them felt impossible to cross, as if her disappointment hung in the air like a barrier he could never break through. "Is this about money?" he asked, though he already knew the answer was bigger than that. "It's about the life I thought we'd have," she said. "The life everyone around me seems to be living. Travel, stability, not worrying about whether a flat tire will ruin our month. I want a future I can rely on, Daniel. I want more." The word echoed, hollow and unforgiving. He swallowed hard. "And you don't think I can give you that?" Her silence confirmed everything. Daniel felt something inside him crack, not a sudden break, but a long, splintering fracture that had been forming for years, finally giving way. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled, slow and tired. "So what happens now?" he asked. Olivia held his gaze for a long moment, then glanced at the small suitcase by the couch, the one he had noticed earlier but had chosen to ignore. Her voice wavered when she spoke. "I'm leaving today." He blinked. "Today? I can't drag this out. I've already found a temporary place to stay. I didn't want to disappear without telling you why." Daniel's fingers curled against the countertop. He felt foolish, blindsided, even though a part of him had sensed this coming months ago. He remembered the nights she stayed late at work because she needed space, the way she avoided his touch when the stress piled too high, the way she cried quietly in the shower when she thought he couldn't hear. "Is there someone else?" he whispered. Her eyes widened, hurt flashing briefly before she shook her head. "No, this isn't about someone else. It's about us, and the person I've become trying to keep this going." The hurt eased, but only slightly. Daniel took in the sight of her, the woman he married, the woman he loved more than anything, and realized that nothing he said would change her mind. She had already chosen the door. He nodded once, a small broken gesture. "If leaving makes you feel lighter," he said, "then I won't stop you." Olivia's breath hitched. She moved toward him as if to touch his arm, then hesitated, letting her hand drop before it reached him. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I never wanted to hurt you like this." He didn't trust himself to speak, so he said nothing. Silence stretched between them, heavy and final. She picked up her suitcase, pausing at the door. For a moment, her face softened the briefest flicker of the girl he once knew, the one who used to kiss him under street lamps and laugh at his clumsy dancing. But whatever glimmer of warmth remained faded as quickly as it appeared. The door opened. A gust of cold air swept into the apartment. "Goodbye, Daniel." He watched her step into the hallway. She didn't look back. The door closed with a soft thump, sealing him inside a life that suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too empty. Daniel stood alone in the half-lit apartment, listening to the faint echo of her footsteps fade until there was nothing left but the hum of the faulty heater and the hollow ache settling deep in his chest. And in that stillness, a single thought repeated itself with merciless clarity. He had never been enough for her. The years that followed did not pass quickly. They moved through Daniel's life like a slow tide, steady, patient, reshaping everything in their path. Seattle changed around him. New buildings rising, old shops shutting down, neighborhoods transforming under the weight of urban growth. He changed too, though almost no one noticed at first. His transformation was quiet, built from long nights, worn hands, and a determination that grew sharper every time he remembered the look in Olivia's eyes the day she walked away. He rented a small workspace near the industrial district, a converted warehouse that smelled of metal shavings and machine oil. The building was cold in winter and sweltering in summer, but it was the first place that felt truly his. At a battered workbench, he spent hours sketching designs, studying blueprints, learning everything he could about automation systems and emerging technology. He poured himself into the work with the same intensity he once reserved for love. It kept him awake, kept him going, kept him from replaying old conversations that hurt more than he ever admitted to anyone. During those early years, Daniel lived modestly. He biked to the warehouse, ate microwave meals, slept on a thrift store mattress on the floor of his tiny apartment. He rarely went out except for supply runs. He saved ruthlessly every dollar, every cent, treating money not as proof of worth, but as fuel for a future he now wanted for himself. Slowly, his ideas grew into something real. He developed small, automated tools for local mechanics first, then for a few factories around the city. Word spread. Clients recommended him. Manufacturers asked about custom systems. The warehouse filled with machinery, wires, screens, and prototypes. One winter morning, while steam rose from his cup of instant coffee, he saw the numbers in his bank account shift into a range he never imagined. But the success didn't feel triumphant. It felt earned, heavy with the memory of what had pushed him to begin. By the time Daniel turned 35, Mercer Automation Solutions had a team of 20 employees and contracts across the West Coast. He moved the company into a sleek, modern office overlooking Elliott Bay. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the harbor cranes lifting shipping containers, mechanical giants that mirrored the world he now belonged to. Yet, for all the progress, Daniel remained private. He stayed out of the press, declined interview requests, and lived in a quiet townhouse on the outskirts of Queen Anne. He kept his routine simple: early mornings at the gym, long hours at work, occasional dinners with his brother. He never remarried. He rarely dated. Whenever he felt a flicker of interest in someone, it faded quickly, burned out by a fear he never named out loud. He still kept Olivia's last message, an old email about forwarding her mail archived in a folder he never opened. Though he never admitted it, he remembered her birthday every year, the date lingering like a shadow at the edge of his thoughts. While Daniel's life grew outward in scope, Olivia's life moved in the opposite direction, wider in appearance, emptier in substance. Her first move after the divorce had been into a condominium her friend helped her secure, perched high above downtown like a promise of a better future. She switched to a new job in corporate marketing, one with glass offices and catered lunches, where everyone posted curated versions of their happiness on social media. Olivia blended into that world easily. She learned the right wine to bring to dinners, the gyms where people networked instead of sweating, the small talk that made her appear confident and successful. She dated men who ordered expensive cocktails and talked about plans, investments, and opportunities. They complimented her looks, her charm, her ambition. But none of them ever asked about the small things, her fears, her childhood dreams. The way she used to stay up late sketching dresses she wanted to design someday. That part of her faded, unused, until she barely remembered it herself. One man she dated for nearly 2 years, a real estate developer named Brian, seemed promising. He had the life she thought she wanted: a condo overlooking Lake Union, a stainless steel kitchen, a Tesla that hummed more than it roared. But he also had a way of speaking to her like she was something polished and presentable, a woman who fit a certain mold. When he grew stressed, he withdrew, and when she cried, he asked if she could keep it together before a dinner party. They broke up on a warm August night after an argument that exhausted them both. Olivia walked home alone through the humid air, realizing she felt more lonely standing beside him than she ever had sleeping next to Daniel during their hardest years. After Brian came others, men who were handsome, charming, ambitious, men who looked good in photos but left her bed cold by morning, men who said all the right things in public but flinched when she asked for something real. She found herself scrolling through social media late at night, comparing her life to the carefully curated happiness of others, feeling a hollowness spread inside her that no luxury could fill. Sometimes, without meaning to, she wondered what Daniel was doing, whether he was happier without her, whether he still lived in that damp apartment or had finally built the career he used to dream of. She never checked. Pride kept her from searching his name, though curiosity tugged at her more often than she confessed. Years slid by. Her circle of friends narrowed as people married, moved, had children. Parties became less frequent, calls shorter, conversations thinner. Olivia found herself at dinners where everyone spoke about promotions and renovations, and she smiled at the right times, laughed when expected, but often returned home with a quiet ache that settled behind her ribs. It was in her early 30s, after a particularly painful breakup, that she stood in the bathroom of her upscale apartment and stared at her reflection under the soft vanity lights. Her face was still beautiful, sharp cheekbones, soft eyes, perfect makeup. But there was something missing, something unlit. She realized she had built a life out of appearances, not connections. She had gained entry into the circles she once envied, yet she felt more invisible than ever. She climbed, but never landed. She shined, but never glowed. And in moments of stillness, when the city quieted and her apartment felt too silent, she thought back to the life she left behind, not with longing, but with a question that refused to fade. Had she walked away from the wrong thing? Years later, that question would return at full force the moment she wrote Daniel Mercer's name on a wedding invitation addressed in her elegant, practiced handwriting. The morning Olivia chose her wedding invitations was unusually bright for Seattle. The kind of clear day that made the water on Lake Washington glitter like scattered glass. She sat at a long marble table inside a boutique stationery shop in Madison Park, flipping through thick albums filled with embossed lettering, ivory cardstock, and ribbons tied with surgical precision. A representative named Elise hovered nearby, speaking in a soft, polished tone that matched the store's aesthetic. "Most brides go with a minimalist style these days," Elise said, sliding another sample toward her. "Simple, elegant, timeless." Olivia nodded, though her attention drifted. The word timeless echoed in her mind, settling somewhere deep, where memories she rarely touched lay dormant. She ran her fingers over a piece of heavy cream paper, its surface smooth, the gold lettering shining subtly under warm studio lighting. She imagined her name printed there, Olivia Hartman, and just below it, Grant Wallace's. A pairing that, on the surface, was perfect. Grant was everything her social circle praised. A successful lawyer, impeccably dressed, composed in every setting. He was considerate in a measured way, affectionate in the right moments, and his future was lined with predictable success. She didn't love him in the wild, breathless way she once loved Daniel, but she told herself that love like that was reckless, unsustainable. What she needed now was stability, respect, a partner who fit the life she worked years to build. Still, as she reviewed fonts and decorative borders, a faint pressure tightened in her chest, a quiet restlessness she had been ignoring for months. "Elise," she murmured, "I'll take these." She tapped the sample she found, prettiest, though it wasn't beauty she was looking at, but the empty space where names would go. Later that night, Olivia sat at her dining table, surrounded by envelopes, a pen with black ink, and a list of guests Grant had sent over. His handwriting was neat, precise, predictable, much like him. A jazz playlist hummed from the kitchen speaker. Candles flickered. The apartment smelled faintly of sandalwood. Everything was arranged for calm, but Olivia felt anything but calm. She began addressing envelopes one by one, her cursive practice from years of writing thank you cards and polished notes. The names blurred together as she worked colleagues, relatives, distant family friends. She paused occasionally to sip wine, letting the warmth ease the tightness in her shoulders. Then she reached a blank envelope. No name, no assigned guest. She stared at it, pen hovering above the flap. Before she realized what her hand was doing, she wrote a name she had not spoken aloud in years: Daniel Mercer. The letters formed slowly, each stroke precise, deliberate. When she finished, she leaned back, breath tightening as if she had just confessed something forbidden. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, stunned by her own impulse. The name looked foreign in her handwriting, too heavy for the delicate paper beneath it. She told herself it was harmless. Closure, that was all, a symbolic gesture to mark how far she had come. She wasn't inviting him because she cared how he might react. She certainly wasn't inviting him out of longing. No, this was maturity, proof she no longer carried bitterness or guilt. Yet the truth curled underneath her logic like smoke. Curiosity, vanity, an old wound she still picked at in private. She wondered how he lived now, if he still worked in that greasy shop, if he ever found someone after her. A small, unspoken part of her imagined him unchanged rough edges, calloused hands, a man who never quite reached the life she believed she deserved. It wasn't cruelty, it was reassurance. A way to confirm she hadn't made a colossal mistake all those years ago. A way to prove the version of her life she had chosen was better. She didn't allow herself to question why the reassurance mattered. Later that night, while Grant was still at a late meeting downtown, Olivia sealed the envelope with careful pressure. Her heart beat too fast, an unsteady rhythm she felt in her throat. She brushed her finger along the seam, whispering into the empty apartment as if confessing to no one. It's just closure. The lie tasted metallic. Days passed. Olivia returned to planning venues, seating charts, floral arrangements. She moved through appointments with practiced poise, telling herself she was simply busy, not unsettled. But every night, she noticed the invitation list taped to the refrigerator, and every night her eyes drifted to the name she added in a moment of reckless clarity. Grant never asked about him. He didn't know that Daniel existed, nor that Olivia had once been married before the life she proudly presented now. She told him once that she had a difficult first relationship, and Grant didn't push further. It was convenient, clean, precisely the kind of omission she had grown used to shaping herself around. A week later, Olivia dropped the stack of invitations into the blue USPS mailbox outside her apartment building. The envelope slid into the metal slot with soft thuds. The sound felt final. She hesitated before releasing the last one, the envelope with Daniel's name. When it slipped from her hand, her stomach clenched unexpectedly. The invitation was gone. No undoing it now. Across the city, in a quieter neighborhood lined with old maples and modest houses, the envelope would soon travel toward a man Olivia had convinced herself she no longer thought about. A man she imagined still living a small life, holding on to old dreams, unchanged. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know about the automation company with its sleek offices overlooking the water. She didn't know he had become a name in the industry respected, requested, quietly admired. She didn't know he carried himself differently now, with a calm confidence forged from years of rebuilding the pieces she left behind. She didn't know the man she believed she outgrew, had outgrown the version of himself she once abandoned. All Olivia knew was the name on the envelope, handwritten in her elegant cursive. Now sealed and traveling across Seattle like a message from the past she pretended she had buried. She inhaled the cool evening air, straightened her coat, and walked back inside her apartment. She felt taller, in control, self-assured. But beneath the confidence lay an unsettled tremor, a quiet warning she refused to hear. That invitation, born from vanity and wrapped in justification, would become the first thread of a life she thought she mastered beginning to unravel. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped beneath a stack of business correspondence on Daniel's desk. His assistant had left it there without comment, assuming it was just another formal invitation from a client or industry partner. The cream-colored paper felt strange under his fingers, soft, expensively textured, the kind used for weddings and high-end events. He turned it over and saw the return address printed neatly on the back. A downtown apartment building, a name he hadn't seen in years. He stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside, the invitation was simple but elegant. Embossed gold lettering, thick cardstock, classic script. The wedding of Olivia Hartman and Grant Wallace. Black tie, reception on the waterfront. A small line at the bottom. We would be honored by your presence. His chest tightened, breath-catching in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He set the card on the desk as if it were fragile, though it felt heavier than anything he'd held all week. He leaned, back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose, trying to ignore the sudden prickle behind his eyes. For several minutes, the office around him faded the hum of computers, the low murmur of his employees, the distant whir of automated testing machines. He was no longer in a modern building overlooking Elliott Bay. He was back in that cramped apartment, paint peeling from the window frame, the smell of damp laundry lingering in the air. A memory rose, sharp and unwelcome. Olivia sitting at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands, unpaid bills scattered like fallen leaves. He remembered reaching out to her, gently touching her shoulder. "It's going to be okay," he'd said, but she had pulled away, wiping her tears as if ashamed of them. "You always say that," she whispered, "but nothing is changing." He closed his eyes now, letting the memory drift away like smoke. But others followed, nights when he worked 2 jobs repairing cars at the shop, then heading to the overnight shift at a warehouse just to make enough to cover rent. He remembered coming home at dawn, hands numb from the cold, body aching, but still waking Olivia with a gentle kiss because he didn't want her to start her day alone. She would smile sleepily, touch his cheek, whisper she missed him. But after months of this, those smiles faded, replaced by exhaustion, then disappointment, then something he couldn't name until she finally said the words, "I can't keep doing this." He exhaled slowly, his heart caught between old love and old wounds. He turned the invitation face down as if that could silence the past, but the memories kept coming. The arguments quiet at first, then sharp. Her frustration over his dreams of starting a business when they could barely afford groceries. His frustration that she didn't believe in him anymore. The tension that crept into every corner of their home, turning warmth into something brittle. And the night she left her suitcase by the door, her voice barely above a whisper, as she said she needed more than hope. Daniel opened his eyes, staring again at the cream envelope lying on polished oak. He wasn't angry now. He hadn't been angry in years, but the ache never fully disappeared. It lived somewhere deep inside him, stitched into the fabric of who he became. Why had she invited him? Maybe it was a gesture of goodwill. Maybe she wanted closure. Maybe she simply wanted to prove something to herself, that she had moved on, that she had chosen well, that the life she lived now was better. He didn't know, and he wasn't sure he wanted to know. For the rest of the day, he couldn't focus. His employees noticed he was quieter, distracted, though no one asked why. He spent the evening at home, sitting at his kitchen counter, the invitation placed beside a glass of untouched whiskey. He tried to imagine seeing Olivia again, her hair styled, her smile polished, her hand wrapped around another man's arm. The thought tightened something inside him. He wasn't jealous, not exactly. It was something more complicated, like watching a younger version of himself disappear into the distance. He walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. A couple strolled past, their hands intertwined, laughing softly. Daniel watched them until they turned the corner. He whispered to himself, "Why now?" No answer came. He picked up the invitation again. The paper felt warm from his touch, too personal, too deliberate. He imagined Olivia writing his name. Did her hand shake? Did she hesitate? Or did she write it confidently, believing he'd show up looking exactly as she remembered him, still the same man she left behind? A faint, bitter smile touched his lips. He set the invitation down and paced the room. Every step felt like a question. If he went, what did it say about him? That he needed closure? That he wanted to prove he had become something? That he was still tied to a past that should have lost its grip long ago? But if he didn't go, would that mean he was still running? He stopped pacing, leaning against the counter. The silence in the room felt heavy, pressing against his thoughts until one simple truth emerged. He wasn't afraid of seeing her. He was afraid of seeing the version of himself she once decided wasn't enough. And yet, after hours of sitting with the invitation, he understood something else, something clear, steady, honest. He had rebuilt his life. He had built something real, something solid. He was no longer the man she left behind. He was someone new. And maybe, just maybe, facing her now would finally close the chapter that had lingered too long. Daniel picked up the pen on the counter, opened his laptop, and wrote 2 words in the RSVP form: "I'll attend." He pressed send. For a long moment, he stood still, feeling the weight of the past settle around him, not crushing, not suffocating, just present, like a ghost finally ready to be acknowledged. Outside, rain began to fall softly, tapping against the glass in a steady rhythm. Daniel listened to it, letting the sound fill the room. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, he felt ready to find out. The morning of the wedding began with a soft drizzle, the kind that brushed the tops of cars and rooftops without fully committing to rain. By late afternoon, the clouds thinned and sunlight broke through in narrow, warm beams that shimmered across the waterfront. The venue, a renovated boathouse overlooking Puget Sound, gleamed with white lights strung along wooden beams, the scent of eucalyptus and fresh roses drifting across the open doors. Guests arrived in tailored suits and elegant dresses, the atmosphere buzzing with polite laughter, champagne flutes clinking, photographers moving between clusters of people like careful observers of joy. Olivia moved through them gracefully, offering practiced smiles, adjusting the fall of her satin dress. She looked beautiful, radiant in a way that belonged more to careful design than genuine ease. Underneath the polished exterior, her stomach fluttered with a strange unease she couldn't quite name. Grant, tall and composed in a charcoal suit, greeted family and colleagues with easy confidence. His hand often rested lightly on Olivia's back, his affection steady and decorous. He noticed her tension, but interpreted it as normal pre-ceremony nerves. "You're doing great," he whispered as they stood behind a cluster of guests. "We'll get through all the formalities soon. Then we can relax." She nodded, but her eyes kept drifting toward the entrance. She told herself she wasn't looking for anyone. She told herself she wasn't expecting anything. And yet her heart jumped every time the door opened, every time a new wave of guests stepped inside. When Daniel finally walked in, she felt it before she fully saw him, a shift in the room, a soft murmur of surprise, heads subtly turning. He entered without hesitation, without a glance at the decor or the view, as though he didn't need to take in the space to command it. His suit was perfectly cut, dark navy wool that contrasted with the crisp white shirt beneath it. He wore no tie, just an open collar that somehow made him appear even more self-assured. His posture was relaxed but deliberate, shoulders straight, expression calm. Daniel Mercer did not look like a man barely surviving, as she had once imagined him. He looked unmistakably successful, polished in a way that came not from wealth alone, but from certainty in who he had become. Olivia's breath caught. She gripped the stem of her champagne glass harder than she meant to. Daniel nodded politely to the usher, then stepped into the reception hall as though he belonged there. He did not search for Olivia immediately. He simply moved through the space with quiet confidence, greeting people briefly, offering a small smile here and there. Some guests recognized him, several industrial clients, a couple of tech executives. A few whispered his name in surprise. "Is that Mercer, the automation guy?" someone murmured. "I heard his company just expanded to California." "No kidding. Didn't expect him here." Olivia felt each comment like a subtle blow, as if the foundation beneath her carefully assembled life shifted by an inch. She had imagined him arriving modestly dressed, maybe uncomfortable, maybe regretful. Instead, he looked like someone who had stepped into a new world entirely, one she did not help him build. Grant noticed her distraction and leaned close. "Is everything okay?" She forced a nod. "Just overwhelmed. It's a big day." He smiled, accepting the excuse easily. Grant was observant, but only to the extent that things fit neatly within expectation. The idea that Olivia's tension came from something deeper or someone never crossed his mind. Across the room, Daniel finally met her eyes. The moment froze silent, suspended. She felt a sharp pull in her chest, as if she'd opened a door she had spent years nailing shut. His gaze was steady, unreadable, not cold, but distant in a way that unsettled her. He dipped his head slightly, acknowledging her with the barest hint of a courteous smile. Olivia felt the room tilt. Grant followed her line of sight. "Do you know him?" The question struck her like a spark. Her throat tightened. "Yes," she said carefully. "From years ago." Grant nodded, accepting the vague answer. "He looks familiar. Probably one of the people your company works with." He lifted a hand in greeting, and Daniel returned the gesture with polite restraint. Olivia couldn't move. 100 memories rushed through her. Daniel sitting on their old couch with grease-stained hands. The nights he came home exhausted, but still asked about her day. The way he used to look at her, hopeful, devoted, trusting. Now he looked at her like a chapter closed. She felt something break quietly inside. Daniel maintained his composure, though seeing Olivia in her wedding dress stirred something deep and complicated. Her beauty wasn't surprising. She had always been beautiful, but it was the practiced nature of her grace that struck him. Everything about the wedding shimmered with perfection, but the perfection felt curated, controlled. She had built a life that looked immaculate from the outside. He wondered, not for the first time, whether she had found the happiness she once insisted she needed. A server passed by and offered him a drink. Daniel accepted a glass of sparkling water and moved toward the edge of the room, where the view of the water stretched out beneath early evening light. The horizon glowed a soft gold, boats drifting quietly, the world outside vast and indifferent. He inhaled deeply. He didn't regret coming. He felt no desire to interrupt her joy, no longing to step into her life again. But seeing her stirred memories that were woven into his past so tightly he could not pretend they didn't exist. He held the glass loosely, letting condensation gather against his fingers as he watched the room quietly. Behind him, Olivia tried to steady her breath. Grant slipped an arm around her waist. "Ready for the ceremony?" She nodded, though her mind felt scattered. "Yes, of course." But as they stepped forward to greet guests, she glanced once more toward the windows, toward the man standing alone with the sunset behind him, the man she left believing he would always remain a shadow of what she wanted. He wasn't a shadow now, and the realization shook her in a way no one in the room could see. For the first hour of the reception, the whispers grew quietly, like wind brushing the tops of trees before a storm. They began at the edges of the room near the bar, where two tech executives compared notes on industry leaders, near the tables where older guests exchanged names like currency, and near the cluster of Grant's colleagues, who prided themselves on knowing everyone worth knowing. The name traveled quickly. Daniel Mercer. At first, it meant nothing to those who only glanced at him. Across the room, a well-dressed man standing near the windows, silent and composed. But as recognition spread, so did curiosity. People drifted closer, eager for a better look. A ripple of interest moved through the reception, subtle but undeniable. A senior engineer from a local firm nudged his companion. "I swear that's the founder of Mercer Automation." "The one who just landed the contract with Delphi Robotics?" "That's the one." Another guest chimed in, her voice a little too loud from champagne. "Is he consulting for the wedding? Why would someone like him be here?" Grant overheard fragments of the conversation as he moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, shaking hands. At first he thought it was the usual gossip, someone wealthy, someone impressive, someone important. But the repetition of the same name began to draw a crease between his brows. "Mercer?" he murmured under his breath. Why does that sound familiar? He glanced toward the windows. Daniel still stood in the same place, framed by the soft glow of sunset and the calm sway of the sound. There was something undeniably assured about him, something that belonged to a man who didn't need to announce his presence to occupy space. Grant felt a faint pull of curiosity, a note of respect. Then he noticed something else. Olivia had been watching Daniel for several minutes, though she pretended not to. Her smile wavered when their eyes met. She looked away too quickly, almost guiltily. Grant's chest tightened with an instinct he didn't quite understand. He approached one of his colleagues, a partner from the firm who had spent half the evening bragging about his portfolio of tech clients. "Who's this Mercer guy everyone keeps talking about?" Grant asked, with a lightness that didn't match the question's weight inside him. His colleague raised an eyebrow. "You don't know him?" Mercer Automation is one of the fastest-growing engineering companies on the West Coast. Their client list reads like a who's who of tech and manufacturing. The guy practically reinvented half the automation systems local factories use. Grant blinked. "That Mercer?" "Yes. And he's here, at your wedding." His colleague paused, then added quietly, "Kind of a big deal, Grant." Grant offered a polite smile, but inside, something shifted. He had heard of Mercer Automation anyone with an interest in business or expansion had, but he'd never connected the name to the man standing in his wedding reception, or to Olivia. He made his way back to her, weaving through the guests with a focused calm. She stood near the head table, speaking with her mother, her posture too stiff for someone meant to be celebrating. When she saw Grant, her expression flickered relief, worry, something else she tried to hide with a small smile. "Everything all right?" she asked, smoothing the front of her dress, though nothing was out of place. "I keep hearing about someone named Daniel Mercer," Grant said casually. "Apparently, he's some kind of industry figure." The color drained from Olivia's face. Grant saw it. His pulse quickened. "Yes," she said softly. "I invited him." "Why?" he asked, still gentle, still giving her room to answer. Her mother excused herself quickly, reading the tension like a seasoned strategist. Olivia swallowed. "He's someone from my past." Grant studied her carefully. "A friend?" She hesitated, just long enough for an answer to form on its own. Grant felt his stomach tighten. "Olivia," he said quietly, "who is he to you?" "He was my husband," she whispered. The music and laughter around them muted, fading into a distant hum. Grant stared at her, stunned, as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "You were married?" he asked. "You told me you had a difficult relationship once. You never said it was a marriage." "I know," she said, voice trembling. "I should have. I didn't know how to bring it up without it sounding like a flaw, or why would it sound like a flaw?" His voice was calm, but it carried the sharpness of a blade. "Because I left him," she admitted. "I left him when he was struggling financially, when he couldn't give me the life I thought I needed." The confession hovered between them, fragile and dangerous. Grant had always admired Olivia's poise, her ambition, her drive. But this unveiled a piece of her he didn't know how to categorize, something that didn't fit neatly into the polished image she presented. "So you left him for being poor," he said quietly, the words tasting foreign, uncomfortable in his mouth. She flinched. "I was young. I was scared. I made mistakes." "And now," he asked, "why invite him?" Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. "I told myself it was for closure, to show that I had finally moved on. But maybe I wanted to see if he had too." Grant exhaled slowly, feeling the sharp sting of a truth he didn't want to face. He wasn't jealous, not exactly, but he felt something else. The unsettling realization that his bride had a chapter of her life she had never fully closed, a wound she had never healed. Across the room, the whispers grew louder, more pointed. Isn't that her ex-husband? He's more successful than the groom. Did she invite him for comparison? Grant could feel the eyes of the room shifting, the social tide turning like a current he couldn't control. He forced his voice to remain steady. Do you still have feelings for him? Olivia opened her eyes. Pain flickered deep inside them. I don't know what I feel. I don't want him back. I don't want the past, but seeing him like this, her voice cracked, it's harder than I expected. Grant looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time since he met her, he wondered whether he truly knew the woman standing beside him, or whether he was marrying the version she curated for the world. The whispers continued, rising into a hum of curiosity. Daniel, still by the windows, lifted his gaze slightly, aware of the sudden shift in the room's energy. He didn't move. But the past had returned, not with the force of anger, nor the warmth of nostalgia, but with the sharp clarity of truth. And nothing at the wedding felt the same after that. The wedding had drifted into an uneasy rhythm, music playing, guests mingling, conversations rising and falling with forced lightness. But beneath the polished surface, the atmosphere had shifted. A quiet tension rippled through the room, as if everyone sensed the story unfolding just beneath the lace and champagne. Olivia felt it closing in around her. Her mother's voice had grown clipped, anxious. Grant kept glancing toward Daniel, hands flexing at his sides as if resisting the urge to confront him. And every time Olivia met someone's eyes, an old coworker, a distant cousin, a friend of the family, she saw the same question reflected back. Why is your ex-husband here? By the time she excused herself from the crowd, her chest felt tight, her breath shallow. She slipped into a small side room used for storage, dimly lit, quiet, lined with boxes of decorations and unused chairs. She closed the door gently behind her and leaned against it, the satin of her wedding dress whispering softly as she folded her arms around herself. The silence cracked her. Tears welled without warning, spilling over before she had a chance to stop them. Her breath shook. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth as sobs shuddered through her chest. She didn't hear the door open. Olivia? Daniel's voice was low, steady, so familiar it felt like a ghost had stepped into the room. She looked up sharply, eyes wide and wet. Daniel stood in the doorway, framed by the dull hallway light. He didn't step inside immediately. He waited, giving her space, the way he used to when she was overwhelmed. Some habits, even broken ones, lingered. "Why are you here?" she whispered, though she was the one who had invited him. He stepped inside only far enough to close the door behind him. "Because you asked me to come." She let out a trembling exhale, her back sliding down the wall until she sat on the floor, the hem of her dress pooling around her. She didn't try to hide her tears now. She was past hiding. "I shouldn't have invited you," she said. "I thought I could handle it. I don't know what I thought." Daniel moved slowly, pulling out one of the unused chairs and taking a seat a few feet away from her. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. His expression was calm, too calm, given the storm unraveling in front of him. "Then why did you?" he asked softly. She wiped her cheeks with trembling fingers. "Because I needed to see you," she whispered. "Or maybe I needed to see who you'd become." Silence stretched between them, dense and heavy. "I told myself it was closure," she said. "But that was a lie. I wanted to believe I made the right choice back then, that leaving you gave me the life I deserved." Daniel didn't move. He didn't interrupt. "But when you walked in," she continued, voice cracking, "I realized how wrong I was. You're not the man I thought you'd become. You're different, strong, successful. Everything I wanted you to be, when we were together. Daniel inhaled slowly, eyes steady. I didn't become this because of you, he said, and not in the way you think. Olivia bowed her head. I know, but it still hurts. She sounded small, like the girl she once was, long before life hardened her into someone who traded dreams for stability. Daniel's face softened, but there was a distance in his gaze, a boundary she could feel, even from across the room. Olivia, he murmured, I'm not here to hurt you. Her breath stuttered. Then what are you here for? He paused. The answer came slowly, honestly. I came because I needed to know that I could face the past without falling apart. She lifted her head, surprised. You weren't the only one who needed closure, he added. Olivia pressed her palm to her forehead, tears streaking down her face again. I ruined us, she whispered. I ruined you. He shook his head. You didn't ruin me. She looked at him with shattered disbelief. You hurt me, he admitted. Deeply. When you left, I felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. I spent years believing I wasn't enough, not as a husband, not as a man. Her breath caught. She wanted to reach for him, but her hands remained limp in her lap. But the divorce... He searched for the right words. The divorce forced me to rebuild myself, not to win you back, not to prove you wrong, but because I couldn't live the rest of my life thinking your decision defined me. Olivia's fingers curled inward. Every word felt like both balm and blade. I grew, Daniel continued. I worked. I built something I'm proud of, and I learned who I could become without needing anyone's approval. For a moment, the only sound in the room was Olivia's quiet sobbing. You look at me now, he said gently, and you see what could have been. But this version of me, he never existed while we were together. Olivia's tears flowed harder. I loved you, she whispered. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. Daniel nodded. I know. That makes it worse, she cried. Daniel exhaled. Maybe, but it also makes it honest. She pulled her knees toward her chest, baring her face for a moment before looking up at him, eyes swollen, voice trembling. Do you ever think, if things had been different, if I had waited, if I had believed in you? He cut her off softly. We're not going to rewrite the past. Her heart cracked open, raw and aching. Do you think there's any part of you that wants us back? Daniel stiffened, not in anger, but in finality. He shook his head once, gently. I'm sorry, he said, but no. That door closed a long time ago. Olivia covered her mouth, a muffled cry slipping between her fingers. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was the sound of a truth she had feared hearing since the moment she wrote his name on the invitation. Daniel rose from his chair and knelt beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough to show he wasn't abandoning her in her pain. You're getting married, he said quietly. Grant deserves all of you, not the part still looking backward. And you deserve the chance to move forward without carrying this weight. She sniffled, tears dripping onto her gown. I don't know if I can. You can, he said firmly, but not if you're holding on to me. Olivia closed her eyes tightly. When she opened them again, Daniel was still there, steady, calm, compassionate, but no longer hers in any way. He stood slowly, offering her a small moment to gather herself. I'm going to step outside, he said. Take a moment. Breathe. When you're ready, go back and finish the life you chose. Olivia watched him walk to the door. Her voice broke on its way out. Daniel, I'm sorry. He paused, hand on the handle. He didn't turn around. I forgave you years ago, he said softly, but forgiveness isn't the same as return. Then he opened the door and slipped out. leaving Olivia alone in the quiet room, surrounded by the ruins of what she had finally admitted too late. Daniel stepped out of the side room and into the cool night air behind the boathouse, letting the door close softly behind him. The sudden quiet washed over him like a cleansing tide. The muffled music from the reception drifted through the walls, distant laughter, clinking glasses, the faint hum of celebration continuing without him. He inhaled deeply. The air smelled of salt water and pine, the faint trace of evening rain still clinging to the wooden deck beneath his feet. The sky over Puget Sound had turned a deep blue, streaked with lavender and gold as the last threads of daylight faded across the horizon. For the first time in years, Daniel felt still. He walked to the edge of the deck, resting his hands on the railing as the water rippled gently below. Lights from passing boats dotted the distance, each one casting a soft glow that shimmered across the surface. He listened to the quiet rhythm of the waves meeting the shore, steady, constant, indifferent to the turmoil inside the building behind him. He let the memories come, not in the sharp, painful rush they once carried, but softly, like pages turning in a book he had finally finished reading. He remembered Olivia laughing in the early days, her fingers laced with his as they walked through the city, planning a life they believed would unfold simply because they wanted it. He remembered the first apartment they shared, tiny and imperfect, but filled with hope and late-night conversations and burnt toast on Saturday mornings. He remembered their first argument over money, the worry in her eyes, the promise he made that things would get better. And he remembered watching her leave, suitcase in hand, her heart torn between love and fear. Those memories no longer tore into him. They passed through him like echoes familiar, but powerless. He stood there until the air grew colder, until his breath fogged softly in the deepening night. Inside, the reception continued. But something had cracked beneath the surface, he knew it, and Olivia surely felt it more acutely than anyone else. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel vindicated. What he felt instead was release, a quiet, steady, unexpected freedom. Footsteps broke the silence behind him, careful, hesitant. He turned, half expecting Grant or one of the wedding staff. Instead, he found Marcus, his older brother, hands shoved into the pockets of a borrowed suit jacket. "You disappeared," Marcus said, joining him at the railing. "Thought I might find you out here." Daniel nodded. "Just needed a moment." Marcus studied him, then glanced toward the boathouse. "You okay?" Daniel took another breath, letting it fill him, grounding him. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." For a man who rarely spoke of emotions, Marcus didn't push further. He simply nodded, leaning his elbows on the railing beside Daniel. "You know," Marcus said after a moment, "some things end messy. Doesn't mean they can't still end." Daniel let the words settle. "She's not the same person she was," he said quietly, "and neither are you." The truth resonated more deeply than he expected. From inside the boathouse, faintly visible through the glass, Daniel could see Olivia at the edge of the reception hall. Her posture was trembling. Her head bowed as her mother tried to steady her. Grant stood a few feet away, torn between approaching her and giving her space, his confusion clear even from a distance. A few guests whispered behind their hands. Others pretended not to look. Olivia wasn't collapsing in dramatic sobs. She was folding inward, silently, like a structure slowly giving way under its own weight. It was heartbreak with no audience meant to witness it. Only Daniel understood the shape of it. He didn't move toward the glass. He didn't need to. He had given her honesty. He had given her closure. Anything more would have been a reopening of wounds neither of them needed. Marcus nudged him gently. "You ready to go?" Daniel cast one last look at the venue, the warm lights, the elegant decorations, the wedding he had walked into as a ghost from someone else's past. "Yes," he said. "Let's go." They walked across the wooden deck and up the small path toward the parking lot. Gravel crunched under their shoes. The night air deepened, cool and steady against Daniel's skin. When they reached Daniel's car, he paused before getting in. "This was the last piece," he said quietly. Marcus tilted his head. "Of what?" "Of who I used to be." The words surprised even him with their clarity. They weren't dramatic. They weren't bitter. They were simply true. He had spent years building a life on foundations stronger than fear or abandonment. Success hadn't healed him. He had healed himself through time, through effort, through refusing to remain broken. But some part of him still carried the shadow of that old wound, the echo of the man who once believed he wasn't enough. Tonight, that shadow finally loosened its hold. He slid into the driver's seat. The interior smelled faintly of cedar from the air freshener, the dashboard glowing softly in the dim light. Marcus buckled in beside him. "You want to grab a drink somewhere?" Marcus asked. "Or head home?" Daniel shook his head. "I think I'll just drive for a bit. Clear my mind." Marcus opened the door to step out, but paused. "You did the right thing," he said. "For both of you." Daniel nodded once. "I know." He meant it. Marcus closed the door and walked toward his own car, giving Daniel a small wave. Daniel started the engine. The soft hum filled the quiet parking lot. He pulled out slowly, turning onto the road that hugged the water. The city lights flickered in the distance, mirrored on the dark surface of the Sound as though guiding him forward. He rolled the windows down slightly. The wind carried the scent of pine and salt, and something else, something clean, like the promise of a new season. He didn't think of Olivia as he drove. Not with longing, not with anger. He thought of the man he had become, of the life he built, of the possibility of waking up tomorrow without the weight of old regrets pressing against him. Far behind him, inside the glowing boathouse, Olivia sank into a chair, hidden from view. Her dress shimmered under the soft lights, her hair perfect, her makeup smudged. She held her face in her hands, her entire body trembling with the realization that mistakes can be forgiven but not undone. But Daniel didn't see that. He didn't need to. He drove into the night, the road unfolding before him like a quiet promise. For the first time in a long time, he felt light steady, anchored, and finally free of the shadow who once followed him everywhere.